one of the most important business processes is the requirement for due diligence. And so we must be mindful that the reputation of the program is determined by those individuals who are bearers of our passports. And so in doing that, we must make certain that we undertake a certain process that is rigorous, that is in keeping with international standards, and that can be held up to scrutiny by anyone and ensure that we come out with flying colors. Due diligence really requires a process of background checks and interviewing. And the background checks and interviewing are done to ensure that we can determine whether or not an individual has any criminal records, whether or not we validate the identity of the individual, and we also need to look at the issue of the source of wealth. And in today's environment, many of you have worked and done businesses with banks, and part of the process is ensuring that they can verify the source of wealth, ensure that there is customer identification, and go through a process of the due diligence. We need to make certain that the persons who are considered for the process have the proper reputation, and so there will be a reputation check, there will be a physical health check, and of course there will also be financial analysis and consultations. Because we want to make certain that the process can stand up to scrutiny, we wanted to look and ensure that we dealt with the highest levels of scrutiny that could be considered. We wanted to make certain that whichever due diligence firms that were considered and who were to engage in this process had experience in serving the international markets. So it was not only doing it for the first time, but we wanted to make certain that the international financial institutions have been considered and that they were the due diligence service providers were actually conducting due diligence on international financial institutions. We wanted to select someone also in an agency that had the experience of working in the G7 countries, such as the USA, Canada, UK, and etc. And of course, fundamentally, that we wanted to make certain that they had a proven track record. We also looked at whether or not it was necessary for us to do it internally or externally. So we went through a process of determining whether or not there were any due diligence entities here in Antigua and Barbuda that could provide us with that international reputation that could stand up to scrutiny. And we made a decision, having looked at the core competence of the individuals, having looked at the neutrality, because if we use the third party, then the government could utilize a third party which is neutral for getting feedback and determining whether or not the individual stood up to the sort of scrutiny that the background checks and the interviewing process would have unraveled. We also looked at the question of cost, and the cost had to be affordable, and to make certain that the process was also affordable for those individuals who were going to be considered. And the fundamental component of this was that the entity had to have the ability to have that global outreach and be able to communicate and go to different parts of the world and find information. We didn't necessarily want somebody who was just going to stand there and do a global search on the internet and then provided us with information. So in terms of the determining whether or not we wanted an in-house provider or outsource it, we really looked at going to international firms that provided us with the international reputation that could stand up to scrutiny. When we looked at part of the due diligence service providers process is that each due diligence service provider must be licensed by the CRU. So they too will undergo some measure of scrutiny to ensure that they fit the criteria and that they're able to provide the services that the CIU would require. There must be, again, an established due diligence entity and a detailed list of requirements that are going to be considered. Of course, is that that entity must have financial stability, they must have a proven track record, they must be certified by some other entity, preferably some government, state agency that would have used the services of the service providers, the due diligence service providers, and they are certified. And so we know that they come with some measure of credibility from many of the G7 countries. What process did we use in the selection? Because of the importance of the process, we wanted to personally interact with many of the due diligence service providers that would have been considered. And so we invited them, a number of agencies, to come to Antigua so that we can sit with them, face them, and ask some very specific and pointed questions, and also do some background checks on those particular entities to ensure that they were bona fide and that they could undertake the type of requirements that we needed. They met with the entire task force, and for those entities that had any blemish on their records, they were excluded. And we wanted also to ensure that whoever those entities that were providing the service, they could also provide a sharing of knowledge and enhance the capacity and the capability of the CIU. And we expect that possibly within 3 years, that there will be that transfer of knowledge, capacity, capability, and know-how in dealing with the due diligence process. Having considered a number of entities, there were several that were selected, and this is by no means the only group that will be considered, and as more become available and we understand the market a little better, that others will then present their credentials and they will be examined with a view of making other selections. I must also add that the reason why we have several, because quite often you have due diligence providers that are specialists in different parts of the world. So somebody who might have the expertise to reach out into the continent of Africa, for instance, and really dig deep and understand and be able to come up with the proper analysis may not have the same capability in Europe. So we might need to select a different agent to operate out of Europe. There may be a different agent that will be required to operate out of the USA, etc. So we are selecting different agents based on the expertise that they provide and in the part of the world that we expect may request that we can receive applications from. Some of the due diligence agents that we have selected thus far as follows: Kroll, we have Ernst & Young, we also have selected Bishop Services Incorporated, IPSA International, and the Risk Advisory Group. So those are some that we have selected to date, and as I said, that we will continue with the process of selection as long as the program continues, and that there is the desire to have some diversity and a choice of different entities based on where the applications may be coming from. There are several other levels of security that we looked at just to ensure that the reputation of the program is maintained and that the program lives up to international scrutiny and also international standards. First, there will be an authorized agent, which will be that authorized agent who will be required to promote the program and to receive applications from overseas. So they will also undergo a certain review process, a process of scrutiny and security to ensure that we're satisfied with their capabilities and standards. There is also the local entity through which all applications will come, which we will refer to as the CIP agent. And they too before they are authorized, they will be subject to some process of due diligence along with several other components and factors that will allow us to appoint a CIP agent. In addition, all applications that come in will be reviewed by the CIU. There will also be a due diligence agency that the CIU would utilize and refer applications to as a part of its own process to ensure that the application is given due consideration. And if there is a requirement for further analysis, having received an initial report from the due diligence firms, then it is possible where there are any particular gray areas, because in this process you can either have a black area or white area. The white area is that everything is clean and everything is okay, and the black area that, definitely it's a no. There are going to be occasions where there may be gray areas which will require further enhanced due diligence. And so on those occasions when there is a gray area, there may be something that requires further checking, then the enhanced due diligence process will be undertaken to ensure that we can uncover any particular issues that would assist the CIU in determining which way to go. And finally, the process of interviewing the client is also another process, so that there are several layers of security that the applicants must go through before the CIU then makes a final determination. I review those very quickly. The authorized agent, then the individual goes through the CIP agent, which is really the local entity. Then there's a CIU review and determination. Then the application also goes on to a due diligence firm for further analysis. And if necessary, there is enhanced due diligence. And then after all of that, then an interview takes place to make a final determination. Ladies and gentlemen, that gives you a synopsis of the due diligence process that will be undertaken when the CIU is established. I must just quickly add that the task force here is really set up to look and examine this particular process and make recommendations. We don't know as yet who the members of the CIU will be, who will be responsible for implementing this particular program. But the recommendations will be there. This process is a very important one to get your feedback, to get your concerns, so that the recommendation to the government could include any particular concerns or areas of recommendations that you may have that could seek to strengthen the program, so that at the end of the day, the program can stand up to international scrutiny, can meet those particular international standards that we all would wish for this program to undertake, and ensure that we are where we need to be in terms of not allowing the concerns raised by many of you to be undertaken. It requires meeting the highest level of scrutiny, and it is important that this process is undertaken to ensure that we can maintain the highest level. Fitz, thanks a lot. Oh.